Good afternoon. Since I know you all had a lot of questions about Ethiopia and I didn't want to answer them, we asked our colleague Gemma Connell, who is the head of OCHA's regional office for Southern and Eastern Africa and obviously covers Ethiopia, and she's joining us virtually from Nairobi, which is our home base. So I thought we would turn it over to her first, and then we will go to our regularly scheduled briefing. So Gemma, thank you very much for doing this on very short notice, and you have the floor. And of course,
thank you so much for having me. Just to check that you can hear me.
We can hear you perfectly, and we see you everywhere we need to see you.
Okay, there might be a slight delay on the line, but I'll give it my best shot. So thank you so much for having me, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for your interest in the plight of the people in Ethiopia who have been caught up in the conflict there. Let me just start with the events of today. As many of you are now aware, a UN humanitarian flight that departed Addis Ababa this morning was first forced to turn back in the midst of its flight after airstrikes began in Mekele. I can confirm that the government was informed of that flight before it took off, and of course also confirmed that the flight was forced to turn back in midair because of the events on the ground. While we're still ascertaining all of the facts in relation to this event, we're obviously concerned about what has taken place today and what it means for humanitarian operations in northern Ethiopia moving forward. But let me come to the people, because that's who we're there to serve. As you all know, and these facts will not be new to you, as of today, there are around 7 million people in northern Ethiopia in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. That includes over 5 million people in the Tigray region, and the other 2 million are split between Amhara and Afar. There are many, many people who have been displaced. Of those, many have been displaced from their home more than once, have been forced to flee, are without shelter. We have rates of acute malnutrition that are rising every day, and not just among children. Nearly half of the pregnant and lactating women in Tigray are also now acutely malnourished. And those of you who are women in the room and those of you who have been pregnant or breastfed know exactly what that means, which is that there are consequences for the mother and the child. So every time we talk about these figures, we have to center them in the people that we are referring to. And these are people in northern Ethiopia who have been desperately affected by this conflict. So let me then come to the response. As you are all also aware, and as Stefan briefs you every single day, we are facing major challenges, delivering the life-saving assistance that is urgently required on the ground in northern Ethiopia. In Tigray, only around 15% of the trucks that should have reached Mekele have reached Mekele since the middle of July. That is absolutely inadequate. We have to be getting more aid supplies in, and we have to be getting every aid supply in that is required. That includes, most importantly right now, the fuel that we need to deliver the assistance. If we are without fuel on the ground inside of Tigray, we are unable to move the vehicles that are required to get life-saving assistance to people's hands and into their mouths. So fuel has to move. As of today, there are 14 trucks of fuel that are in Samara, that's in Afar, waiting to move to Mekele. We desperately need those fuel trucks to move because we need that fuel on the ground to fuel literally the humanitarian operation. We also need cash. If we don't have cash on the ground in Tigray, our staff and their families are unable to get themselves the food that they require to continue on their own lives while at the same time serving others. If we don't have cash on the ground in Tigray, we're unable to buy the supplies that we need for the basic day-to-day operations. And beyond that, of course, we need aid supplies. 90 trucks a day of food, you've all heard that before, and another 10 trucks every day of other items, essential medicines, nutritional supplies, all of the other things that we require to save lives inside of Tigray. But it's not just in Tigray that we're having challenges. We're also, especially because of the conflict that has escalated in the last 2 weeks, facing very significant challenges to reach people who have been extremely hard hit by this conflict in the neighboring regions of Amhara and Afar. It is absolutely vital that we're able to move into areas where people have been newly displaced. We spoke to colleagues on the ground. We know that there are people who are fleeing for their lives, and those are the people that we have to be able to reach. So with the conflict escalating and with all of the other barriers that you're aware about, we are facing many, many challenges on a daily basis, but we are absolutely not giving up. And this is a message that I want to share with you all today. For the people inside of Tigray, 400,000 of whom are facing catastrophic food insecurity, we are not giving up. We have many staff who have remained on the ground, even when they have to be in bunkers. They are still there and they are still completely dedicated to delivering the assistance that is required. Outside of Tigray, we're continuing to work every single day to scale up our operations on the ground in Amhara and Afar. More than 700,000 people have been reached with food assistance in those two regions since August. And that shows you how hard we are working every single day to make sure that people, wherever they are, whoever they are, if they are in need of life-saving assistance, we are trying to reach them. So Stefan, let me stop there by way of opening remarks. I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. We'll go first to Edie Lederer, Associated Press.
Thank you very much, Gemma, for doing this briefing. I have two questions. First, on the issue of fuel, especially since you've gotten in humanitarian aid but not fuel, what is OCHA's assessment of why all the fuel trucks are being blocked?
Go ahead, Gemma.
Thank you so much. We don't have an assessment on that fact, to be honest. All we know is that each day we reiterate the fact that we need that fuel on the ground in Tigray, and we will continue to reiterate that fact. It is a matter of fact that without the fuel, we can't move the supplies. And regardless of what the reasons are for that, that is the reality.
And can you make clear to us whether the aid being blocked is being blocked by roadblocks put up by the government, by other forces, including the Tigrayans?
Thank you so much for the question. It's a really important one. So there are a multitude of factors that are hindering our ability to get the right amount of trucks in every single day. One of them, there are the approvals from the federal government. That differs on the basis of different supplies. The other is the challenges that we face at checkpoints along the route. So there have been times when we've had permission to move from the federal government and then have proceeded to move and we've stopped at a checkpoint. This is in areas that remain within the control of the Afar regional forces of the federal government. And we have also faced challenges where we've had community resistance, where communities have stopped us and prevented our ability to move because of their own frustration, because they are not receiving the assistance that they believe that they deserve. Now, put all of those together and it is a very, very challenging situation. So we continue to work every single day with the federal government, who are continuing to engage with us on a daily basis, especially on these urgent requirements. We continue to engage with the Afar regional government, who have been supportive as much as they can. And we continue to engage, and this is absolutely critical, with the communities on the ground, because we have to explain what are the challenges? Why are there so many trucks going to Tigray? That's because there are so many people there who are literally at risk of losing their lives. And at the same time, to explain to those communities that we are striving to reach them as quickly as we can.
And one final question. On today's flight that did not achieve its end, what are the implications? Are you going to try again tomorrow? Or do you think that trying to fly aid in at this point is too risky?
That is a matter that we're going to have to look at over the course of the coming hours. We're still figuring out the exact details of what occurred today, but most certainly until we have those details figured out and until we're able to ensure that we are able to move forward with the guarantees that we need to be able to fly our teams safely, as I'm sure you can imagine, we will have to look at what we're able to do. So we will be assessing all of this in the coming hours as more of the details come to light and as we're able to figure out what is feasible. I should note that the airstrikes and the escalation of the conflict in general have had major consequences. So we've not had a single truck, as well as the challenge of the flights, that's been able to get into Tigray since the 18th of October.
Thank you very much. We'll go to the screen to take some questions. Michelle Nichols at Reuters. Michelle?
Hi, Gemma. Thanks so much for jumping on this at last minute. I just wanted to ask you a bit further about, you mentioned the malnutrition, and we've obviously heard that some 400,000 people are on the verge of or in famine-like conditions. What's the sort of update on that, and what evidence are you seeing of that? Obviously, it's hard for media to get in. What sort of visuals are you seeing of sort of how desperate the situation actually is? Thank you.
Thanks so much for the question, and nice to hear a familiar accent. Let me just preface this by saying that one of the biggest challenges we have right now in terms of fully understanding the situation ourselves is the lack of fuel. So without that fuel, the teams that go out to do what we call in technical speak, community screening, which is to say checking how many children in a community are facing malnutrition, those teams right now are unable to move because we have to prioritize the incredibly limited supplies of fuel that we have available for the most urgent tasks. That being said, the teams that go out speak consistently to this, especially in rural areas. And here we have to acknowledge those who are able to get to urban centers, who are able to get to facilities for treatment, they are the people who are able to move. So in those centers, we're still seeing extremely concerning rates of malnutrition. Now, you can imagine that once we get out of those urban areas and we get to those communities who are unable to travel, who are too weak to move, those rates are even higher. So this is what teams are telling us on the ground. It is extremely difficult for us right now to come with these statistics that I know everybody wants. That's because of the challenges we're facing. But what we are seeing is consistent, and what we are seeing is a consistent deterioration of the situation, both for children and, as I mentioned earlier, and this is a grave concern, for pregnant and lactating women, which of course has also consequences for the children they are carrying and the children they are feeding.
And just a quick follow-up on the fuel trucks. I know you obviously are in a bit of a tricky spot when it comes to sort of saying who exactly might be to blame for these fuel trucks not getting in. But on a very basic level, can you sort of tell us where do these fuel trucks come from to get to Mekele? Where do you find this fuel, and where does it come from?
Thanks, Michelle. I'm not going to be able to go into maybe the procurement details that you'd like me to today, but what I can say is that this is fuel that the United Nations procures through our usual procedures, and then we transit that up to the staging point at Samara, where it's waiting to travel into Mekele. Now, what we need is the green light for that fuel to move, and that is absolutely critical. Without that, our operations will quite literally come to a grinding halt in not too distant future. So that fuel is procured in all of the usual manners. It's handled by the logistics cluster, the World Food Programme, which are skilled and highly skilled at dealing with these matters across every single crisis that we work in, and have all of the measures in place to ensure that that fuel is going to go to the humanitarian operations on the ground in Tigray.
And you're waiting on the green light from
the government.
The federal government.
That's correct.
Thank you. Rick Gladstone, New York Times. Rick?
Thank you. Thank you, Gemma, for the briefing on short notice. I had a couple of questions about the flight that was aborted today. Can you elaborate it? Cargo of that flight? We know there were 11 people on the flight. Can you say anything more about who they were? And is this the first time that a UN humanitarian flight has been aborted in a trip to the Tigrayan capital?
Rick, sorry, you were coming through a little broken, but I hope I got the question okay. So just to confirm that the passengers on today's flight, the 11 passengers that you mentioned, they were humanitarian personnel traveling in Tigray to be part of the humanitarian response. Out of respect for those colleagues who I'm sure you can imagine have had a very difficult day, I'm not going to go into any further details about who and which agencies. Suffice to say, they were all humanitarians traveling to be part of this response. In terms of whether or not this is the first time we've had a flight turn around, we've had flights turned around because of weather, but this is the first time that we've had a flight turn around, at least to my knowledge, in the recent past in Ethiopia because of airstrikes on the ground.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions before we we release Gemma? Excellent. Gemma, thank you so much again for doing this on very short notice. And we hope to be able to call on you in the future. Take care and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you, colleagues. Pleasure being with you all.